Hello, my name is Rebecca Gunu, and my partner is MJ Legre. We are in second period AP Human Geo, and our research question is why are there tensions between the Philippines and China over the South China Sea? Let's get started.
For decades now, there have been territorial disputes between countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia, specifically between the Philippines and China. In 1935, the Chinese government released a map called Map of Chinese Islands in the South China Sea. This map had 11 dashes on it, delineating the territory that China was claiming, which was about 90% of the South China Sea. In 1949, the Chinese government laid off their claim to the Gulf of Tonkin, creating the now 9-dash line. China argues that it has a historical claim to the South China Sea, dating back to naval expeditions in the 15th century. However, the Philippines' claim to the Spratly Islands was based on a voyage and annexation of Admiral Thomas Gloma Sr., who was a Filipino lawyer and businessman. He relinquished all his rights to the islands over to the Philippine government in the 1970s. The claim for the Kalayaan group of islands, a group of islands that the Philippines claimed which are part of the Spratlys, was enshrined in the 1973 Philippine Constitution. Filipinos claimed the islands were vacant, unoccupied, abandoned, and with no legal owner at the time they were claimed by the Philippines. Filipino fishermen have relied on the rich fishing grounds in the Kalayaan group of islands for generations. Between 1973 and 1982, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea was signed by over 150 countries. Most countries base their claims off the United Nations Law of the Seas, which says a country's territory extends 200 nautical miles off its shores, an area called the Exclusive Economic Zone or EEZ. Any trade or resources that fall in a country's EEZ belong to that country. They're its sovereign territory. Every country in the region, which includes Malaysia, the Philippines, Brunei, and Vietnam, bases its claim to the South China Sea on the UN's EEZ laws, except China. In 1973, when the UN law established EEZs, China reaffirmed its 9-dash line, refusing to clarify the line's boundaries and rejecting other countries' claims. Since then, tensions have built around who rightfully owns the South China Sea. The dispute has centered on the Spratly Islands, an archipelago at the heart of the South China Sea. Currently, China, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam claim some part of the Spratly Island chain. They have asserted their claims by putting small buildings, ports, and even some people on what are essentially rocks in the middle of the ocean.
This ancient rust bucket is the Philippine Navy ship Sierra Madre. On board, a tiny garrison of 10 Philippine Marines, all that stands in the way of another Chinese takeover.
The Spratlys are very important, because whichever country can successfully claim them can extend its EEZ to include them, thus getting miles of sovereign territory. This is why China began building up islands in the South China Sea in 2014. Experts believe that the Spratly Islands could be the source of billions of tons of oil reserves, petroleum reserves, and natural gas, although it is still unconfirmed. The South China Sea is estimated to hold 11 billion barrels of oil and 109 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. It is also considered as one of the most productive fishing grounds in the world. The region's fishing grounds supply work and food for many in the entire region. The South China Sea is estimated to hold 10% of the world's fisheries. Most importantly, 30% of the world's shipping trade flows through the South China Sea to the ports of Southeast Asia. All of this would mean that the South China Sea is an incredibly important strategic area in terms of territorial control, power, and resources, and 5 countries currently claim some part of this region for these very reasons. China's 9-dash line overlaps with the Philippines' EEZ, and as mentioned before, China's claims aren't based on the international law of the sea, which it signed off on. In 1995, China took control of Mischief Reef, a reef within the Philippines' EEZ, as well as Scarborough Shoal in 2012, a reef 140 miles from the Philippine coast. The Philippines accused China of violating the Philippines' maritime rights and violating international law by interfering with fishing, endangering ships, and failing to protect the environment at the reef. China has been attempting to expand the size of its holdings through dredging and land reclamation, building up small reefs into full-fledged islands from which to better enforce its claims of sovereignty. This includes the Scarborough Shoal. These takeovers begin with a few vessels littering around the reef, says Singapore-based analyst Colin Coe.
And right after that, we saw the construction of wooden structures, and then it got graduated into concrete structures. And what we have right now is a full artificial island replete with airstrip, and now the stationing of warships in the area. So this is likely the scenario we might be looking at.
Since 2014, China has been building islands in the middle of the South China Sea. China claims they aren't military bases, but their actions say otherwise. What were once underwater reefs are now islands complete with airfields, roads, buildings, and missile systems. In less than 2 years, China has turned 7 reefs into 7 military bases in the South China Sea. By turning these rocks into military bases, the Chinese are now able to support hundreds of ships, bolstering their presence in the region. They are using fishing boats, surveillance ships, and navy destroyers to set up blockades around other countries' islands and to defend their own. This is all done very cautiously and in small steps in order to avoid sparking a wider conflict. According to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, also called AMTI, Chinese vessels, by contrast, operate as sentries, staying at targeted features for weeks at a time and usually leaving only once a replacement has arrived to continue the watch. More recently, various reefs and shoals within the Philippines EEZ are being patrolled by China, including Whitsun Reef. Between March and June of 2021, hundreds of Chinese vessels, believed to be manned by Chinese militias, were spotted at Whitsun Reef. The Philippines has described the presence of the boats inside its EEZ as swarming and threatening. China claimed that the boats were sheltering from rough seas and no militia were aboard. The Philippines' top diplomat, Teddy Locsin, said that he routinely orders Beijing to move its boats out. He says,
for example, in Whitsun Reef, 220 or 240 vessels show up. I get mad, I file a diplomatic protest. And the Chinese say, no, they're just fishing. But all they're doing is annoying us, raising suspicion throughout Southeast Asia. So I told them, you must have fished a lot by now. Do you mind leaving? And they started to leave. But then they're coming back again.
Beijing says a few hundred boats massing out of its fleet of thousands isn't unusual. But such swarms raise fears that China is not only overfishing, but overreaching with possible hostile intents. AMTI outlined an incident in May 2021 when Chinese Coast Guard vessels tailed and chased Coast Guard vessels from the Philippines, which are almost always outsized and outgunned. The Philippines appears determined to assert itself, but the country's patrols are pale in comparison to the intensity of China's near-permanent Coast Guard and militia presence. China's claim to most of the South China Sea isn't backed by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but is instead based on the 9-dash line and its historical claim to the South China Sea. In 2013, the Philippines submitted a complaint against China after China took control of Scarborough Shoal in 2012. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled in favor of the Philippines in this case opened in 2013 against the People's Republic of China. The tribunal finds that China's declared 9-dash line has no legal basis for its claims to historic rights to resources in the South China Sea. The court also ruled that none of the land features fit requirements under the UN Convention on the Law and the Sea to generate a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone for China. Many of the features are the results of extensive Chinese land reclamation. Despite this, China keeps sending ships near the Philippines and the Spratlys in general in an attempt to claim more territory. This has prompted public distrust of China. Canada, Australia, the United States, Japan, and others have voiced concerns about China's intentions, prompting rebukes from Beijing. The Philippines have dramatically increased their South China Sea patrols. As China deploys more of its military to the Spratlys, other countries, such as Malaysia and Vietnam, are getting nervous and building up their own islands. Manila, the capital of the Philippines, is drawing greater attention and international condemnation to China's activities, particularly on the militia front, with its public protests. The President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has extolled China over the US and has been cultivating collegial non-confrontation with China, even as China militarized islands near and within the Philippines' EEZ. As the Philippines heads into the 2022 election, candidates running for president are expected to campaign against Duterte's refusal to condemn China's claim to nearly all of the South China Sea. Manila-based analyst Robert Herrera Lim said,
"And we are moving into a phase where the military starts probing and the Navy start probing to say, how can they show that they are asserting Philippine rights in those disputed waters? So showing up is half the battle."
The United States has also sent ships to the South China Sea, claiming to try to protect freedom of navigation and to keep an eye on Chinese operations in the region. The Biden administration is leading an international effort against China. It's also rejuvenating its alliance with the Philippines. An outreach that Jose Custodio, a defense analysis and military historian, says is easily summed up as, "If you need us, if you're intimidated by the Chinese, call us and we'll be there. We'll back you up." But he says once things quiet down, the Chinese will be back, and the Philippines must step up with its own assets. He says it simply cannot rely on the Americans. Foreign Secretary Teddy Locsin says, "Historically, America just wanted to be number one, and I'm fine with that. I can be friends with China, but I cannot let them in the door." You can see here that there's a division between political powers in the Philippines, with the president now wanting to confront China about its controversial intrusions into Philippine sovereign territory, and with other powerful political figures, such as Teddy Locsin, siding with America against China's pursuits in the South China Sea.
So, these territorial disputes over the South China Sea are extremely important because, as mentioned earlier, the South China Sea is one of the most important seas in the world. A lot of trade passes through this sea. This sea also contains a lot of natural resources. So, disputes could impact trade, and that includes trade of natural resources, which would be seafood, natural gas, and petroleum between countries. Disputes left unaddressed could also spark military conflicts between countries. China has already been building military bases in the region. China's assets, quote-unquote, outmatch and outgun those of other countries claiming parts of the South China Sea, specifically the Spratlys. The current disputes over the South China Sea could also lead to larger political tensions, especially between China and the rest of the world, and specifically between China and the US. Tensions in the Philippines against President Rodrigo Duterte may also rise due to his friendship with China. So yeah, thank you for listening in and watching our presentation. We hope you enjoyed. Thank you.